Hi, my name is Anushri Alva.
Hi, I'm Cyrus Vakil.
Hi, I'm Radhika Miskita.
Hi, I'm Shaheen Mistry.
I'm Nitin Patil.
I'm Bibha Krishnamurthy.
I work at Adhyayan.
I'm principal at the Bombay International School.
I'm the Director of Research and Outreach at the Gateway School of Mumbai.
Founder and CEO of Teach for India.
State Commissioner for Persons with Disabilities, Maharashtra State.
Founder and Executive Director of Umeed Child Development Center.
Inclusion, I think, fundamentally means that you include all children, irrespective of their gender, disability, preferences, and so forth. And you make sure that the system accommodates to include the child in every way.
I think the only thing I would add to inclusion is that it's based on the premise that everybody has strengths and everybody has needs, and we address the needs. So it's very responsive to the need of whatever the learner and the parent and whoever's part of that space. So
I think we need to acknowledge that a school that does not do school interviews for children at the time of admission, if they just took in the general population, they will get about 15% of kids who will have special needs, who will have language delays, reading difficulties, learning difficulties, Down syndrome, autism, the whole gamut. If you include all of them, it's going to be about 15%. So this is not a small issue. The magnitude of this issue is big. We need to sit up and pay attention to it.
I've seen very incredible things happen in inclusive classrooms where children start to take responsibility for each other. Sometimes I think we believe that there's a resource constraint because we think it's the teacher who's the sole provider of support, and yet you see this amazing shift in power in a classroom where children step up and just have the most rich learning experiences from working with each other. I remember a third standard classroom of ours in Chennai which had a hearing impaired little child, Shiva, and the class decided that this child was feeling left out all the time, and so they developed a whole sign language themselves, taught it to each other, taught it to him, and the whole class started to use that sign language. And I just think about the learning process and the journey of leadership that these little 8-year-olds went through to make another child feel included.
One always tries to create an educational environment that is as little like a bubble as possible, and which really, in a sense, brings the world in microcosm to the school. And from that point of view, I mean, inclusion represents in the classroom what the world is like. And so if you are not bringing those children in, you're essentially doing a disservice to the other children in the class.
One size fits all. It's an archaic concept right now. We're moving forward. We're learning to differentiate and to give each child what they need. And so any child in that classroom, you don't need the same maths curriculum as a language curriculum as the social skills curriculum as another child. Personalizing and individualizing education allows me to push you ahead in one area, give you more scaffolds in another area. And that's the same thing with inclusive education. If we're able to change what the traditional classroom format is, which many schools are trying to do, and I think that's what's making inclusion a reality, that allows every child to get what they need. And I think that's what will bring a parent in to an inclusive setup, because it's not just for another child. I'm not just helping that other child. My child's not being pulled back because he's with a child with special needs, but my child is getting an individualized program like the other kid who also needs it.
If parents understood that actually this is good for my child, whoever my child in that classroom is, an inclusive classroom is good for my child, is good for his learning. If they really understood that and the will was there to attempt, then I think we'd find a lot of solutions, whether it meant upskilling our teachers more, whether it meant finding creative solutions with whatever limited resources we have today.
Ultimately, what a child takes away from the classroom is not just the cognitive, but as you said, also a whole lot of other things, including values and attitudes. I mean, it might just be that the math class that day moved 10% slower because some people had to be helped along. But the gains on the positive side are much more substantial.
Can I add also just a beautiful story came to mind. I visited with Sister Cyril, who ran for many years the Loreto high-income school in Kolkata, and at the time when I visited, she had integrated 400 street girls into the school, meaning they were living in the school, studying in the school, etc. And I asked her the same question. I said, what has the reaction of the parents been? And it was so interesting. She said, I looked at the parents and I said, would you dare ask me why I'm teaching math or why I'm teaching science? But you will look at me and dare to ask me why I'm teaching compassion and why I'm teaching understanding.
Someone once told me that inclusion requires dil, will or skill, right? So dil being, really the culture that you create, the compassion and the culture of equality or equity, and the broader culture, which involves families, which involves support staff, which involves the school staff. The will is really the policy, and if you aren't backed by policy, a strong school policy that says yes, we take kids with special needs, and parents are told at admission, and that's really how it's going to work in our school. And subsequently, the skill, as in we do need to scaffold what the teachers do in the classroom, just not in numbers, but in the skills to deal with, say, challenging behaviors in the classroom, or what do you do about social ostracism in outside the classroom. So those are all skills that a school needs before we can just launch, not before, but as a part of the process. A school that's inclusive of children with special needs is a school that has good pedagogy in general, or has good practices in general, or is inclusive of everyone. It's not just, for example, I remember speaking to Kiran, and she said, we don't think of students with disabilities as a separate subgroup. We think of them, yes, we need to include students who are from economically weaker sections. We need to include students who have different sexuality preference, and we include students with disabilities. It's just whatever comes up, we deal with it, because that's just what we do.
So the Canadian system has a really good inclusive schools policy, and that's precisely the paradigm shift they went through, right? From moving from saying special needs, special ed, children from different economic background, ethnic minorities, just making it education for all, right? Like what kind of pedagogy, what kind of systems are required to deal with, like a flexible structure that allows you to deal with all the different kinds of needs that come in. So moving it away from it's just special needs to, if you're a really good teacher, you'll be able to deal with different types. And what you see in traditional classrooms is that everybody moves at the same pace, they do the same kinds of tests, you express your learning in the same way. In an inclusive space, I think we have to start challenging that idea of why is everybody learning at the same pace? Why is everybody learning the same thing and at the same time? If everybody gets what they want, eventually collectively be better, because studies in, say, in the US and Canada show that when you segregate, it's far more resource heavy than when you make inclusive spaces, right? So you're spending taxpayer money is going into public schools that are segregated. And so here, if we're able to think of how do you leverage kids, how do you leverage parents, how do you sort of equip a teacher, it'll be less resource heavy, and I think collectively things like your income levels go up when everybody's potential is tapped.
As far as the governmental issues, policies is concerned, wherever we go, now that we were not talking of inclusive schools, so that's why the RPD Act is talking more of inclusive education. However, if we go into special schools, then we also have to talk about the inclusive setup over there.
Inclusion is a process, and we cannot throw out the baby with the bathwater. There is a role for special schools right now. Yes, there is a child who can't be included yet. Okay, so yet being because the schools are not ready yet and the child may not be ready yet. We hope that will happen, and we think that will happen eventually, but I think we need to be pragmatic about the fact that this is a process.
Well, at the policy level, I mean, while I accept the point that we all need a more humanistically driven education system, I don't think special needs can really wait till that happens. I mean, already we have since 2005 with a very progressive and humanistic national curriculum framework. I mean, has anything happened between 2005 and 2017 to actually convert the education system and take it in a different direction? No. The problems in the last 10 years has increasingly been defined as one of access rather than access to what.
Right.
And that's a huge public policy problem, which, and frankly, we've taken the wrong turn.
In fact, I'm going to say that we're looking at access, which I agree is often defined only as physical access.
Exactly.
Are they accessing the education
Exactly.
is another matter
Exactly.
altogether.
Exactly.
And likewise, when we are looking at outcomes, we're often talking only about academic outcomes, and we are not talking about other outcomes. And while it's hard to define some of the other outcomes, it may be interesting to look at outcomes which are significant by their absence. So I'm talking about things like bullying. There's a very interesting study done by a researcher from TISS and London School of Economics amongst inclusive private schools in Bombay. And it's a qualitative study that interviews a whole bunch of parents and children. And the children's accounts of their experiences in school are simply heartbreaking. I promise you that paper will make you cry, because it really is these children talking about bullying, exclusion, victimization at various levels. And you really need to think about, when you say let's start here and now, that's something we can change. We may not be able to change the fact that schools are driven by academic outcomes, but that they can be places which are welcoming and safe. A very fundamental thing. Safety is not guaranteed, certainly not to a child with disability, within the school system. So I think that's something at a policy level, that perhaps bullying is something that needs to be looked at, and mental health in general.
Within the education setup, I think we need to focus more on 0 to 5 years of age also, if it comes to disability field, because unless we go and intervene into early detection, early intervention, a hearing impaired child can easily get integrated into normal schools if he is allowed to learn how to talk much before he is 5 years of age. So the question of inclusion just comes out so easily if early detection and intervention happens. Same thing happens if there is a developmental delay within the child. So 0 to 5 years is the place where education system has not taken over still. So that is the place where the government needs to intervene and ensure that whatever deficiencies are being noted, they can be compensated with. So this is how inclusion can be supported by special schooling, and special schooling can also be supported by inclusion.
One of the things I want to talk about is that we don't celebrate enough schools that are inclusive. And I've seen various organizations do best in the class kind of prizes and competitions and so forth for schools. I've seen parent report cards for things that are visible, that are put out for parents. When I say parent report cards, I mean here's our school, here's the colleges our kids got into. So I think we need to make inclusive education aspirational.
So I think as part of my work, I've in the last year visited a lot of rural schools, a lot of schools in small towns which are mainstream, and nowhere have I ever felt like the teachers are saying, I don't want to be inclusive, right? almost all teachers in schools have the sense of some kids are falling behind and I don't know what to do, right? And so some schools will try to have a remedial program, some schools will ask them to stay back after school, some schools won't do anything, but nowhere have I heard like, I don't want to include this child or I want to kick this child out of school, right? It's like this space of helplessness. It's like, I really don't know what to do. The child doesn't pay attention or the child is not interested. So you start labeling it something else, but you don't know how to deal with it. And so I think what has been helpful as I've been having this conversation with different schools is being able to show them, like you said, those best practice schools, right? And saying, this is, because they'll say, oh, but this is in India, look at our school sizes, look at what we have to deal with, how is this possible? And then you can show them examples of schools that are doing it, right? And it's not rocket science. It's a few things. It's about building that culture. It's about putting some systems into place. And of course, it takes time. But saying that, okay, somebody has been able to do it and you can go look at that. You can be connected with them. So I think even being able to show them the possibility. Before I even started in my own school, am I even open to saying, okay, can I see something that looks a little different? I think the second part being involving parents, children, teachers in decision making in school. Unless that happens, you don't really see shifts.
So interesting. I'm thinking that a lot of this goes down to like, what is the purpose of education, you know? And if we continue to believe that education in this country, our predominant belief is that education is about exams to go to college to get a job. It's about livelihood and that's it. And unless I think we expand that to say that education, of course, is about like being equipped to do what you want to do, but also being equipped to be who you want to be. If we expand it to that definition, then inclusion makes so much sense in the context of that, right? Because you're not just thinking about a competitive environment where one kid gets ahead of the other, but you're thinking about human beings growing up together and contributing to each other in the world.